without having to worry about whether your contract is going to be fulfilled or fulfilled in the right way or not. So I think no matter what hat you wear, if you really want to trade cotton safely, I think sanctity of contract is probably of paramount importance.
Thank you, Nayan. We're going to move on to Mr. Mahesh Sharda, who's the president of the Indian Cotton Association. And I would ask you that, representing a different cotton association in India, I'm sure that you have very similar views to that of the CAI. But could I also ask you your thoughts on the meaning of contract sanctity?
As far as sanctity of contract is concerned, I feel all associations have the same opinion. It is utmost important for any business to maintain the sanctity of contract. If we see the Hindi meaning, it's called Pavitra Anubandh. Basically, it's a holy contract, and any lapse, if it is there in the contract, in legal, there is no excuse for it in legality. What I would like to add is, there is a standard contract available on ICA website. A person, as far as only cotton is concerned, before entering, he should read that. It's very simple, very crisp. Most of the time when people are entering the contract, they are pressurized to make too many conditions which should be avoided. This is my personal suggestion. And if you read it well, I think chances of error are less. And people can consult their friends, which they avoid. There is no need in shying to always consult your friend for a contract. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mahesh. So we're now going to move on to Mr. Bill Kingdon, who is the Managing Director of the International Cotton Association. Bill, I'm going to go a slightly different question. Over the years, different boards, managing directors have reviewed the role of the ICA, but the association has remained steadfast in the belief that contract sanctity and the association's role as an arbitral body must remain at its core. Can you give the audience a view as to why the association maintains this fundamental belief?
Peter, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to come and join such a distinguished panel this afternoon. You're quite right, of course. And as a former president yourself, you know well the focus of the ICA, and I can of course confirm to you that that focus has not substantially shifted, but it does seek to remain current, and we need to ask ourselves whether we've got that focus right each year, every season, to check that we are meeting the needs of our members, who of course come from 500 of them from every sector of the cotton world and from every region of the cotton world. And we see it as critical to our role that we represent the interests of members effectively from wherever they come. Now, Bill Ballenden earlier described the key advantages of membership of the association, and at its heart and underpinning that is a comprehensive set of bylaws and rules that provide that architecture, provide the underpinnings for safe cotton contract for the exported cotton bale worldwide, that's internationally respected and is seen to be fair. And I hope that the goodness of our association is that, being based out of Liverpool, which no longer has an axe to grind, no longer is active in the cotton community, means that we have a tradition of cotton, of understanding the market, but are now completely independent of that market, and we can bring a system which is underpinned by English law, which provides the foundations for everybody's contract. So this is at the key of delivering the ICA mission. Many of you will know that, to protect the legitimate interests of all those involved in the sale of cotton, be they seller or buyer. And of course, that needs to be underpinned by a system of dispute resolution. And that is furnished by more than 30 independent arbitrators who are certified, they have passed exams, and they are independently recognized as being experts in their field, and they're cotton people who are experts in your trade and their own trade, who are there to provide that independent assessment of the dispute in question. And perhaps I can take this opportunity, is now a good time, just to show one slide, because I'm sometimes asked as I travel around the world, how effective is arbitration? And so in a brief way, I seek to illustrate it by this slide. Since 2016, we've had 76 applications for arbitration to the International Cotton Association. And of those, on the right-hand side, you will see that half of them have been successfully implemented. They were settled after the arbitration was initiated. And those parties are now trading safely one with another. In amber, you'll see that a further 20% of them could be seen to be on track to being settled. They're still being resolved by the parties concerned. And less than a quarter in the reg segment have ended up with one of the parties being listed on the list of unfulfilled awards in what would be called the default list. So for me, this work has been very eye-opening and important to us to see that in 76% of cases in the last 3 years have not resulted in the listing of parties, and in the majority of cases, these cases have been settled. So a long answer to your short question. Yes, of course, it remains at the heart of the ICA's focus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. Now we're going to move on to Mr. Mehdi Ali, who's the president of the Bangladesh Cotton Association. Mr. Ali, I'm going to ask you, Bangladesh has grown to become a huge importer of cotton. As a representative of such a large consuming country, what do you feel is the role of consumers in maintaining contract sanctity?
Thank you, Peter. And my apologies, my vocal condition is not good. Today I am here due to Mr. Vinay's strong request. I don't know I will able to use maximum words. A general idea is a contract sanctity. And both parties should be honored and fulfill the contract. And for that, for Bangladesh perspective, it's not only actually for only consumer, it's both parties. And I will request to Bill as to make a awareness program about the contract sanctity in Bangladesh shortly. And I will request to everyone who are selling to Bangladesh to choose right person. That's been to choose real educated agents. And if you can choose real educated agent, then you can save your contract. So I think that's all from my side.
Next, we're going to move up back to a trader, Mr. Paul Doran, who is representing here from RCMA. Paul, in recent years, we've seen spikes in the level of arbitrations which seem to contradict the ethos of contract sanctity. So there were batches of contracts or time frames where contract sanctity was challenged. Can you give a perspective on the causes of this?
Thanks, Peter, and thanks for having me here. With so many presidents and past presidents, it feels like a state funeral or something. In answer to the question, I think it's a fairly straightforward. Unmanageable volatility causes spikes in contract defaults and threatens contract sanctity. And when we see rapid peaks and troughs in the cotton market, we see sellers jump out on the way up, we see buyers jump out on the way down, and that might be a mix of greed and self-preservation, one, both, or the other. And I think the textbook example of this would be 2011, and I'm sure the very mention of that year brings back some terrible memories for all of us here. We all bear the scars. We saw cotton at 208 cents in April. We saw cotton at less than $1 in October. And the result of that was a mass wave of default, sadly. And the best way to measure that, I think, is as we look at some ICA statistics. We can see that in 2010, we had 75 arbitration requests. In 2011, we had almost 250, and the same in 2012. So almost every day, the guys at the ICA, every working day, they're dealing with a fresh arbitration request. In the years since then, the market has been a little bit more benign. We've seen only about 350 arbitration requests in the 7 years since then. And I think fundamentally what causes the fragility of contract sanctity is when buyers or sellers aren't properly able to manage their risk that the market brings. But I think if we look at last year, we only had 28 arbitration requests. And that's a real testament to our industry when we see 40 million bails cross national borders, huge value in them bails, and 28 significant contract disputes, I think, speaks to the general trustworthiness of everybody in this room and beyond. But perhaps one note of caution that I would sound is the volatility that we saw towards the end of last year. While nowhere near the levels of 2011, there are certainly some spinners who are hurting, not so much in India, but in other markets that I'm sure you are aware of, who are hurting with 90-cent cotton, with 95-cent cotton. And maybe Bill and the guys at the ICA are sadly going to be a little bit more busy coming into 2019.
Thank you very much, Paul. So now we have Mr. Sharad Sharif, who's the Managing Director of Technocraft Industries. So as a buyer of cotton, do you feel that a competitor who is not fulfilling his contractual obligation is obtaining an unfair advantage over you? And how can the trade rules and cotton associations assist you as a buyer to ensure contract sanctity? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wickfield. No, I don't think that he has an advantage. He does have an advantage for that particular deal, which he doesn't understand that he has a big and far more disadvantage on a long-term basis. The person, let's say my competitor, if he defaults and does not honor the contract, well, for that particular deal, he'll benefit. But the loss of reputation that he will have in the market, and all the cotton traders would be very careful in dealing with him. To give you one example, we have scrupulously honored all our contracts in last 25, 30 years of our existence. And I can assure you that we get a penny cheaper. And the traders are always ready to do business with us before anybody else. So you look at the advantage that we have by maintaining a reputation. So those who default, I feel they are short-sighted. They are looking at only that particular contract. So I don't think they have any advantage over us who are honoring the contract.
Thank you. We're going to move on now to Mr. Sunil Patwari, who's the Managing Director of Nagrika Exports. There are buyers of cotton who also challenge sellers, taking them to arbitration over a contract. How can a seller ensure that this does not happen? Sorry, over there.
Thanks, Peter. The sanctity of contracts, I think, is a mute question. Everybody wants a contract to be honored, whether buyer or seller. Paul just mentioned one of the main reasons why disputes arise. And I guess your question also hints at how we can avoid further disputes. I would simply believe that if the sellers want the buyers not to get into a litigation, they would follow a term that we are bombarded in India for the last few years called KYC, know your customer. If an effort is made to understand what the customer is going to do with the cotton, what he presently buys, from where he buys, and then if a reasonable effort is made to clarify on what is being offered, I feel a lot of the disputes will be avoided. It's a fact that many of the importers of cotton in India particularly are either first-timers or irregular importers. So they're not familiar with what they are buying. And simply going by the contract, the specifications are too wide, and spinners here are not used to that. So if an attempt is made to narrow down the requirements and understand, and then offer something which fits that requirement, I feel misunderstandings will reduce and disputes will reduce. Thank you.
So moving on to Mr. Gopal Agarwal, who's the Director of Cotton Association of India. For how important is contract sanctity in domestic business?
Hello. Thank you, Mr. Wakefield. It is very important for smooth trade. Otherwise, we cannot do any future trade. Mills also not able to buy their future requirement, and buyers and sellers both need to confidence and security when they do any business. And when we do in domestic contract, when we make domestic contract, please put the conditions to follow CI bylaws and rules. And if we follow these rules, put the both side signature. And nowadays, in future, long time we do, then only sensitivity improve in contract domestic also. Otherwise, we not do able long time business.
I'm going to ask now the same question to all of the panel. And so for each of you gentlemen, could you please comment on the steps that you feel are required within the global cotton trade to ensure sanctity of contract is maintained? And perhaps we just follow the same order, if that's okay. So, Nayan?
I think it's very difficult probably to reach every buyer or seller and kind of enlighten them on the need for contract sanctity. But I think if all the associations across the world were on the same page and would adopt the same measures as somebody like the ICA or some other associations adopt, I think, and if domestic trade in most countries would also follow the same pattern, I think we would